We're pleased to welcome now Ashley Edwards, coastal Mississippi entrepreneur, former president and CEO of the Gulf Coast Business Council, SuperTalk Mississippi News column contributor. You got a long title these days there, Ashley. We appreciate you coming on, though, man.
Hey, Gerard, good to be with you. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. We're just having fun with all this crazy stuff going on in the political world. I find it just kind of disheartening that much of our discussion these days, within 5 months of the presidential election, centers around trials and legal matters, on both sides. So we've got, of course, Mr. Trump that's got a long list of legal matters he's grappling with. We got Hunter Biden, the president's son, in court. In fact, I'm watching it on the screen right now. He is walking into the courtroom in Wilmington, Delaware, day 3 of his federal gun trial. This is consumist these days. We should be talking about policy and who's going to get the country back on track and which set of policies are best for America. How do we get here, man? Unravel it for us.
Well, look, I think this plays right into the hands of all of those folks out there that are trying to create the politics of the day, because these are not issues based. I was having a conversation with our good friend Ricky Matthews earlier today, and I was saying, I can't remember in my lifetime a presidential race that was less public policy or issue focused than what we see today. And you think about that in the context, Gerard, that we have got a world that is on fire right now, war in the Middle East, war in Europe, entitlement programs in the United States that are on the brink of insolvency, a changing economy being taken over by new technology and the rise of AI. I mean, all of the major issues that we see in our world and our country today. And you're right, we're talking about things that really don't have a hill of beans to do with any of that. And I think that the problem is our politics is so short-term focused right now. We're not looking at the long game. And, you think about it, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, both of those guys are only going to be around for a very limited time. We've got a long future ahead that aren't going to include Joe Biden or Donald Trump. And we're not talking about any of those things, the things that we're going to wake up one morning in 2030 that are going to be the top of our list. We're not talking about it all today.
Well, we were just talking in the last segment, not sure if you caught it, about Social Security. There's this widely held view that the Congress has stole the Social Security Trust Fund money, and that's why it's in trouble, and that's categorically false. That is not the truth. And I've explained that, and those of us on the right side of the aisle, I know they like to promote that narrative. I wish we just stopped, because it's not true. And we need to deal with the issues. The program's going broke. Medicare's going broke. We need to talk about that in a productive way instead of pointing to something that kind of sounds good from a populist perspective, but it's just not true. And you use the word entitlements. I'm sure you've had people kind of lash out at you, say it's not an entitlement. Well, they misunderstand what the word means. It's an entitlement because in this context, it means you're entitled to it. You've paid into it. And I've seen people say, well, it's not an entitlement. I paid into it. Right, that's why it's an entitlement. Because you're entitled to it. And I'm not trying to ridicule them. I just wish we get to a point, Ashley, where we were just dealing with facts and get off of this train of just, let me find another gotcha that I can make go viral out there and, elicit some sort of reaction, response. But to your point, being short term, talk about entitlements. We know mathematically, financially, Social Security says we can't make the payments 100% in 10 years, and Medicare says it's more like 7. We won't be able to fully pay our Medicare obligation. I mean, that's right around the dang corner, and it doesn't even come up. We're talking about whether or not Hunter Biden checked a box on his gun application and how Mr. Trump recorded his legal expenses in his financial statements. That's not going to fix Social Security and Medicare.
Oh, no question. I mean, Congress putting on these dog and pony shows with hearings with Fauci talking about COVID and things that really don't amount to that much of a hill of beans right now, and not spending time on the issues that are going to really affect every American's life to a very, very large degree. And you're exactly right. There are a whole lot of math problems that can't be solved with rhetoric. And those things are just inconvenient right now because nobody has the answers. I mean, the true thing here, Gerard, and you know this as well as anybody, you're one of the real thought leaders on these issues. I hear your show often. You talk about these things all the time. And that is, the folks want to avoid this at all costs because they know that the answers are going to be unpopular. They're not going to be politically popular. And so it's avoid it. Let's avoid solving these issues and just kind of say, hey, look over here. Let's just play kind of bait and switch here. But these things are not going away, and the math doesn't lie.
I use the word pain. They don't want to talk about it because whatever action you take to truly solve the problem, it's going to inflict pain on somebody, if not everybody. And that ain't popular for a politician to say, I'm sorry, guys, I know this is painful, but this is what we got to do. A lot of folks would be surprised, Ashley, to know that, talking about Social Security, for example, that it was in bad financial condition back in the 80s. In fact, we experienced a time period which was very unusual where the amount of money, it's a pay-as-you-go system, the amount of money coming in from workers was not able to keep up with, plus what we had in the trust fund and the reserves to pay out benefits. It was Ronald Reagan. It was during the Reagan administration when the contribution rates of Social Security and Medicare were increased. Now, imagine today a Republican saying, we got to go up on your Social Security taxes. That would not be popular. What do you mean? We Republicans, we're for low taxes and stuff. Well, just be honest, a lot of people hold up Mr. Reagan as, the ultimate conservative Republican president. Many would point to him as the best in their lifetime. I, too, think the world of Mr. Reagan, but that's just a fact. He increased Social Security and Medicare taxes because the thing was going to go broke if he didn't.
No question about it. And you're talking about the days when fiscal conservatism actually meant something. I heard someone last night on the sort of the cable news talking heads making the point of, hey, we need a fiscal conservative in the White House this time around. And I'm looking out there saying, well, where exactly do we find that person? Every candidate that we have for president right now wants to spend our way into prosperity. Just before COVID hit, Donald Trump was out there trying to push for sub-zero interest rates in perpetuity, trying to move the Federal Reserve in that direction. These things are popular for various reasons, and certainly there are many debates that can be had about the relative merits of things, but none of this sounds like fiscal conservatism. So let's be honest about that.
Well, let's take it a step further. Can you define that for me? What does that mean exactly? Is it fiscally conservative, right? I mean, does that mean balance the budget?
Right.
Does that mean, right? I mean, it could be that sometimes you have a conflict between what people would consider to be conservative versus fiscal conservative. Conservative would mean, and I'm with them, lower taxes. But fiscal conservative means you got enough money coming in so that you don't produce deficits and have to go to the well to borrow money and rack up debt.
Well, the system is so broken now, and the problem is, our entire government is addicted to spending. There are debates about which type of spending is better than the other, but nobody's really having the tough conversations about eliminating deficit, trying to tackle the debt, trying to tackle these mathematical problems that aren't going away, and trying to cut spending. It's just not part of our vernacular anymore.
No, it's not. And unfortunately, what's driving within the federal budget, what's driving these outrageous deficits are the mandatory spending programs that are on autopilot that the Congress never touches, and that's a lot of folks don't realize that. Like we'll cut spending. That means you got to go cut the majority of our spending, which is comprised of mandatory programs. That's 70%. Nobody's going to touch that because it's not politically popular. Okay, well then you're not really serious about being fiscally responsible. Man, it's like you say, it's a math problem. We got a break right here. If you can hang around, we can continue the discussion.
I'll do it. Thank you.
We got Ashley Edwards. Yeah, man. We got Ashley Edwards, Coastal Mississippi entrepreneur, on the line with us. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio. We're visiting with Ashley Edwards, Coastal Mississippi entrepreneur, just talking a little politics here. So we got a debate coming up talking about getting back to the issues, Ashley. Is this just going to be dirt throwing, pie slinging, mud slinging? Or are we going to actually debate some of these thorny problems?
You know, it's gonna be interesting because I do think the debate moderators are going to try to tackle some of these issues and make candidates take a position. They're going to be very resistant to do that. And I don't think you can really discount this debate we have coming up. You know, it's the CNN debate going to take place in Atlanta. I think June 17th is the date, if I'm not mistaken. And, look, in some ways, this might be one of the most important presidential debates in a generation. The stakes are going to be very high for both candidates. And it's going to be interesting to see how they come out of the gate on this. You know, what Trump is going to have to do is not look unhinged. He's going to have to be able to talk to the American people about how, this is not just a retribution campaign, that he's got real public policy plans to make America more prosperous. All eyes are going to be on Joe Biden, obviously, to see how bad he stumbles, whether he's up to the task, whether it looks like he's, in the height of dementia and sort of mental lapses. And so the stakes are going to be very high for both of them. And I don't think a poll that's taken today before the debate happens is really that instructive to us about where this race is going, because I think these debates are going to move the needle to a larger extent maybe than debates normally do, because a lot of people are going to form opinions about where they stand with these candidates based on these debates. Now, that said, Gerard, it's not as if there are a lot of people in the United States that don't know where they stand on either Donald Trump or Joe Biden. But those last undecided independent voters out there, those sort of anti-Trump Republicans who may be uncomfortable with Biden but don't want to vote for Trump, where they land is going to make or break this election for one of these two candidates. And I think these debates are going to go a long way in solidifying those last sort of group of voters out there that are still trying to determine where they're going to land in November.
You're so right. It's something we've talked about on the program countless times, is that the vast majority of the states, they're in the books before a ballot is ever cast, a vote's ever cast. New York, I think, even though Mr. Trump's made tremendous progress there, it's just hard to envision that it wouldn't be, at the end of the day, in the Democrats' column, assuming that's Mr. Biden. And then California, you take Mississippi. I mean, no matter what happens in the debate, Mississippi is going to cast its 6 electoral votes for Mr. Trump. But it's those 5 or 6 swing states. The one that's surprising me, Ashley, I don't know if you've been tracking this, is how Nevada has come into play. In recent polls we've been reviewing, Rhino pointed this out a couple of weeks ago, Mr. Trump's up by like 13 points in Nevada, which historically has been going in the blue column. It seems to be in play. Of course, on the other hand, Georgia's been reliably red. It now is considered a key swing state. Of course, the biggest of all in terms of electoral votes is Pennsylvania, and it's a deeply divided state in that respect. And you're so right. It's those handful of swing voters, and if you look at the 2016-2020 election, both of those effectively were decided by fewer than 100,000 people out of the 135 million that cast votes, 150 million in 2020. It's less than 100,000 people in those 4 states. That's who essentially selects the president under our system, and they could go either way. And I think I'll share this with you and let you respond. I think what could hurt Mr. Biden is if he appears in cognitive decline, if he doesn't seem to really show that he's got all of his faculties, that's what everybody's going to be keying on. How is he going to perform just simply from a physical and mental perspective? I think for Mr. Trump, I would add this to your analysis, which I think is spot on. If he doesn't exact retribution as part of the debate, I think if he dwells on the 2020 election, and again, that's not going to change things in the states that are in the books, but for those handful of voters that he needs in those 4 or 5 swing states, that could be a deciding factor. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. Election night, I'm going to be watching Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Georgia. Be interesting to see what happens in states like North Carolina and Virginia. There's some talk right now about maybe Trump is starting to put Virginia back in play. I don't know how much stock I put in this right now, but for the most part, those Rust Belt states that we talked about, Nevada and Georgia, is going to be where the election is won or lost. And it's really going to come down to, is Trump's base going to show up, and is he going to be able to really get a full set of Republican votes in these states? And then what's that 25 to 30% of independents who are the true swing voters in these states? Again, you could put them in an SEC football stadium. We're not
That's
talking
exactly
about
right.
hundreds of millions of people here that are going to swing these states. And some of these states are going to be very close, decided by 10,000 votes or less, likely in a lot of these cases. And, and it's going to be ultimately who appeals to those voters. And look, I think Joe Biden has a lot to lose here because, if he comes out of these debates and has a performance like he had in the State of the Union, if you couple that with Trump seeming unhinged and just not appealing to those independent voters, that's going to very much, I think, work in Biden's favor, again, about that small subsection of voters who are really going to decide this race. If, on the other hand, Biden comes out, really stumbles, if he looks like he's in cognitive decline, if Trump, who I think is a pragmatist in many ways, is able, and if he's surrounded by people that can give him good advice to say, come out, have a pragmatic, unifying message, talk about American prosperity, talk about how you're specifically going to work to make people's lives better, and not stop and stop talking about how you're a victim, then that could potentially go a long way to swinging things in his direction. So, look, I don't put a lot of stock in the polls right now that, people say, hey, this is Trump's race to lose. This is Biden's race to win, this, or vice versa. Because I think that this 5 months, there's a lot that's still going to play out. There's a lot of things that are going to happen in the world stage in this 5 months that are going to affect this election outcome. And we're just not going to know, frankly, till we get to September and October, what direction this is really heading.
I agree. So I've offered the theory on the program here. Ashley, get your take on it, that Mr. Biden coming out and inviting Trump to debate before the conventions hasn't happened, honestly, in modern times, a bit unprecedented. My theory is this is his handlers looking at internal polls, not the more sophisticated, the more accurate internal polls they pay big money for. They're saying, yeah, you're behind. You're going to have to debate, Mr. President, to make up this gap. That maybe they're thinking, hey, if he performs well, we get a boost and we're good to go. If he flops in the debate, then we can have this conversation with him. We're going to, they're going to run polls immediately after the debates to see how that shifted things around. And if he gets, if it shows that he's losing ground, maybe they have a conversation with him, say, we need you to step aside for the good of the party. That's my theory. What do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. I think that you cannot overstate the level of fear and anxiety that exists within Democratic circles right now. There are a lot of folks there that see the numbers, that see the trends, and they're scared. They know that Biden is incredibly beatable. In fact, I would argue if the Republican candidate wasn't Donald Trump, we probably really wouldn't even be having this conversation
I agree.
about the race being a toss-up. Biden is probably the most beatable incumbent in several generations, maybe with the exception of Jimmy Carter going into the 1980 race against Ronald Reagan. But Trump has a very fervent base, but it's not a large base. And that is going to be the real difficulty here, and it's really the only reason that Biden is still competitive in
Yeah.
this race. I mean, I know there are a lot of Trump fans out there that don't like to hear that because it's like sort of don't never speak ill of Donald Trump. But we have to be realistic about the fact that for all of the people that just absolutely worship at his altar, there are a lot of Americans who sort of fall into that never Trump category. They're not going to cast their vote for Donald Trump. But that does not mean that Joe Biden is a good candidate, and Democrat insiders know that. They understand that they are very vulnerable.
I think more importantly, to your point, we got to go here in a second, but more importantly is where it matters in those 4 or 5 states that you listed off. It's like not like we are in Mississippi. These are people that are looking at both candidates and trying to figure out which way to go. They are the ones who are going to decide the election at the end of the day. That's just the way our system works. I enjoyed the conversation as always, Ashley. I'm sure we'll be talking to you soon. Probably need to get you on before the debate or certainly right after, because there'll be a lot to talk about. Always good to see you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Gerard. Have a great one.
You too, man. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.